project which established trusted small unmanned aerial systems for broader Department of Defense government partners. And so for this one, we're actually going to broaden our list of people here today. We're going to have 4 panelists for you here today. And these panelists will include, first off, Mr. Joel Castillo. He is the Unmanned Aircraft Systems, Robotics and Autonomous Systems Senior Officer for the Corvid Technologies at the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We're going to bring up Sean Anderson as well. He is a project manager at DIU. We're going to bring up Andrew Musto. He is the Deputy Director of Autonomy at DIU. And finally, Mr. Jason Kirkpatrick, the Program Manager at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 4 more of my esteemed guests. Let's bring them on up here. And thanks, guys, so much for joining us this afternoon. We're very happy to have you here. And I'm going to let you guys take it away.
All right. Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate the intro. Again, I'm Sean Anderson. I'm in DIU's autonomy portfolio, and I'm primarily focused on working on Blue Uas. I definitely want to share with you how the autonomy portfolio has been focused on building a capable and trusted drone ecosystem, and Blue Uas is our approach to doing so. Blue Uas has been challenged by different policy changes over the last couple of years within the DoD and in the government, as many who are in the space are aware, and policy is always changing, and so we always have to be adapting to it. And Blue Uas is DIU's answer to that. So as you may recall, over the last few years, initially COTS systems were faced with a ban because of cybersecurity concerns and other concerns within operating in the government space. In late 2019, the NDAA, Section 848, as we're all aware, also restricted certain components from certain countries and further limited the applicable drone space for use in the DoD. And then finally, earlier this year, Executive Order 13981 essentially extended a lot of those limitations to the whole of government. So not just the DoD. DIU, in turn, focused on and created the Blue Uas project and its different platforms in order to respond to this. And thankfully has been joined by the Deputy Secretary of Defense's guidance in September of 21 for the operation and procurement of UAS. So Blue Uas is a whole of government and whole of DoD solution for rapidly prototyping and scaling commercial UAS technology for the Department of Defense and government. And we're doing that through 5 different lines of effort. The first 2 are pretty familiar and core to DIU's CSO process, and that is the Foundry and the Framework. Blue Uas Framework focuses on developing individual components that are going to be later useful in both the commercial space and specific to DoD applications, components that may not necessarily exist within current policy limitations that need to be developed. The Foundry is DIU's proven prototyping process. It's the traditional CSO where we develop a commercial technology into a DoD technology that we can use within the DoD or inside of the whole of government. 3 new different lines of effort have been added to Blue Uas to cover the new and changing policies that have existed in the last year. The on-ramp is a streamlined approval process where we vet systems to make sure that they're policy compliant and essentially add them to the Blue Uas cleared list. The cleared list is a roster of vetted systems. They're constantly maintained and constantly interrogated to make sure that they're still policy compliant, but they're available for anybody inside of the DoD and in turn the US government that wants to follow the same policies to use and to purchase. And then lastly, we have the Blue Uas Hub. The hub is a centralized information repo where any user in the DoD can seek out information about cleared systems, understand test data, and other necessary pieces of documentation that go with those systems so that they can otherwise be used. We started this process back in August of 2018, and moving into the 2020 ban on NDAA and foreign components through, the NDAA Section 848. Blue Uas 1.0 was born out of the Soldier Short-Range Recon Program. And what that resulted in was 5 different prototype systems that you see here on the left. These 5 systems are all personal reconnaissance drones that were designed specifically for the DoD. None of them necessarily existed in the wild beforehand, and they're really designed to be military UAS. That is distinctly different than the current project that we're going through right now, Blue Uas 2.0. The 2.0 project is looking to take already existing commercial systems, validate them, and verify that they are policy compliant, and then move them onto the cleared list so that they can be used in the whole of DoD. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we got where we are in the current environment, as well as what we're doing and what our next steps will be to make sure that we're providing that ecosystem for all of the DoD and government. So, Cash, I'm going to turn it over to you first. Why is acquisition and sustainment involved in the COTS UAS space?
Sean, thank you very much for that. First of all, let me say that Bobby is the greatest hype man ever. I'm going to use him to introduce me on all events from now on. I hope Bobby from Capital Factory is listening. And so thank you for that, Bobby. Also, thank you very, very much, Sean, for that introduction of Blue UAS. I believe you captured it all in just a few slides. So the DoD and as a whole and ANS as a whole has been instrumental since the very beginning of what you mentioned there, the policy from May of 2018. When that overarching policy came out, when it was determined that they were cyber vulnerabilities with commercial off-the-shelf UASs, ANS and the DoD knew we had to regulate, knew from the very beginning that we had to set policy and procedures in order for the DoD to procure and operate commercial off-the-shelves. I think in that as a whole started it for ANS, because that delegation or that guidance memo delegated approval authority to the Undersecretary of Defense Acquisitions Statement and the Department of Defense CIO to be the approvals authorities for all exceptions to policy. So ever since then, ANS has been had a vested interest in ensuring that the Department of Defense use cyber secure UASs in all that they do and make those available to the warfighter.
Awesome. And can you go into what you think the biggest challenges are with COTS UAS in the space right now?
Obviously, we have a ton of challenges with the UASs, and mainly because the DoD has so many missions, so many operations. We can use UASs in so many aspects of in the Department of Defense, from surveilling airfields to search and reconnaissance, as you mentioned earlier, and everything in between. We need small ones, large ones. We need UASs to serve as antennas. We need UASs to serve as communication relays. We need UASs to be visual eyes in the sky. And with that, I think that one of the biggest challenges has been identified, there's no secret to this, is the interoperability. I think the interoperability standards that the DoD has between hardware, software, network architecture, everything in between is a big challenge that we're facing right now. We're trying to ensure that these cyber safe to fly UASs are available, and how do they talk to each other? What's the standard? What's the common architecture between them? I think that's I know that's one of the biggest challenges, and we're trying to do our best to overcome those.
Awesome. And Jason, what do you see as the biggest challenges to end users in the policy environment?
So I gotta start by saying I've heard you and Cash talk more just now than I think the entirety of our relationship up till today. So this is kind of awesome, and what a great format. So I think the big challenge for us, because we do non-tactical operations in the Corps of Engineers almost entirely. We have very little tactical operation. And my program doesn't really involve that. So our biggest challenge is just keeping flying. And when this thing hit, the history that you laid out, it was bleak and very, very difficult. And ANS and DIU both became kind of lighthouses in the storm for us to find our way to being able to keep flying. And for the Corps of Engineers, our need to fly is paramount almost all year, because we have different types of emergency response and activities going on. And so we're perfectly willing to adapt to the policy as it comes out. And probably, if I were to say the challenge there is that the target tends to move. And so your program, as you laid it out, and as I've witnessed and been involved in, is trying to broaden our aperture so that we can hit that target no matter where it moves, and we have a wider range fan. And so I think it's, I don't want to circle myself, so I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate it. And Cash, I think you could probably follow up a little bit on what do you see that, how do you handle that moving target policy challenge from an A&S perspective?
It's very difficult. It really is. Because, as we know, emerging technologies, a lot of times technology, well, in every aspect, not technology moves a lot faster than policy can keep up. Technology moves so much faster than what we can do make sure that we regulate what's coming out there. So how do we tackle it? Number one, we have we partner fantastic with partners like DIU, and of course Army Corps of Engineers to figure out the best way we can to introduce cyber safe, ready to fly UASs to the Department of Defense. And we tackled that in the new version of that policy that you mentioned in your intro slide. This new version of the policy not only sets out to the procedures to procure and operate, but also it gives a list of cleared UASs that are either programs of record within the DoD or considered non-COTS or are identified as Blue UASs, that you have not only Blue Uas 1.0 with the quadcopters available to in the GCA, but also the Blue 2.0 that's coming along. That policy is coming. It changes, but we also see that policy as a benefit in the DoD because it allows that warfighter all the way down range, that sergeant that wants to get a UAS for his unit for whatever reason, he has procedures, specific procedures that he can follow to procure and operate those. And more importantly, that policy, that overarching policy, allows the services and the component commands to be able to set their own policy and guidance for all their warfighters to do it. So, yeah, it's challenging, but I think we're overcoming it little by little.
I'd chip on to that and say that this latest policy that's rolled out is very well crafted in that it gives, as you said, Cash, it gives us, the folks on the line, the technical parameters to stay in. There's very clear boundary lines for us, and now we can start bringing a technical solution. Like our procedural controls protect our data and ensure that we're cyber secure, and that's been something we've had trouble getting recognized, and it's always been get the vendor to give you something cyber secure. Well, we have procedures in place to protect our data, even if we have a nefarious vendor or we have a failure with the hardware. We have procedures in place, and I know that's been recognized by A&S, and it's being incorporated into some of the work that we're doing on the hub with DIU. So all those are good things. So the policy has evolved in a positive way.
Thank you, Jason. I think that was absolutely the case in drafting that. Would try to keep as many folks in mind when using it. And I think if you notice, there's caveats in there now, Sean and Andrew, that are important for folks like you and your business because they're research and development. Now you can use certain COTS UAS in your research and development, and while we're doing that, it maintains that NDA compliance in Section 848. It's compliant with EO 13891, and it makes sure that all the DoD is using the same procedures. So I know. Like I said, we're probably going to start drafting the new version because in 2 years from now, the UAS technology that's being developed right now, it's going to make that policy out of date, and we have to catch up. So we're already working that. But thank you for that, Jason. It took a lot of work, and I'm glad the Deputy Secretary of Defense saw it and said it was important for the DoD and really rushed it to get it implemented, signed and implemented.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Cash. Andrew, why do you think DIU is in this space, particularly when it comes to commercial UAS of this type?
This is a space that the commercial market has driven significantly more than the federal market up until now, particularly small quadcopters, small multi-rotors. That's a multi-billion-dollar commercial industry, and we're spending tens of millions in DoD on the problem set. That's specifically the wedge that DIU is set to tackle, where commercial industry is driving technology in faster iterations than DoD can keep up with. We've seen a lot of very, very impressive innovation on the small UAS space in the United States and other friendly countries. The mission of DIU is to strengthen the national security innovation base. So small UAS is a clear area where DIU has found utility in being involved and will continue to do so in the future.
Sorry, Cash, I thought you were going to jump in there.
I was going to say, one of the things I think from our side in the UXX team and at ANS, we're very proud of the fact that we've partnered really close with DIU in not only 1.0 and 2.0, and we rely on them a lot. Andrew knows I call you guys all the time. Hey, help me out with this, from definitions to technology, to surveys, to markets. And I strongly believe that the partnership that we've established between DIU, ANS, R&E, is essential for the entire department as a whole. And we consider DIU as the experts in this field for the Department of Defense, not only within us, but within the Department of Defense. So we're greatly appreciative of your knowledge and expertise. And I sometimes take credit for your work. I'm very proud of that.
That's what headquarters does.
Yeah, you know that. I just take credit for their work. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, I mean, right back at you guys. I've had you on speed dial for the last few years. The partnership between us and ANS has gotten us to where we are today. I think anybody that's in this space, in the federal space, know that this is nowhere near a solved problem. We could optimize everything from the way that we do the waiver process to getting to the point where we've got more approved ones that don't need waivers. More capital injection into this market space as a whole would be really useful for the entire industrial base. There's a lot of work to do in the future, but we wouldn't be here without the partnerships we've got till now. Apologies for my puppy for that one.
Andrew, if you want to get after that. Jason, really quickly. So we heard the headquarters perspective, but how do you think that other end users can work together as a government to really kind of help with the policy changes that are happening in this space? So
that's an excellent question, Sean. The biggest thing that we need is commonality of standards, and the executive order and the DoD guidance are now starting to get that commonality, and what we do, at least in the Corps, and I think also with other organizations like the Department of the Interior, was a tremendous guide for us to establish our program. And they recognize, and the Tennessee Valley Authority and a lot of state organizations that we work with in the Corps, they recognize that Part 107 is a good training program for use of small UAS for what it's made for, but it's not complete or comprehensive enough in the standards and language and procedures, especially when cybersecurity is concerned, for government operations, for the deeper effort of scientific and engineering data collection. And so I think the more that we can band together as organizations within the government, and even the industry teams like the oil and gas industry and the power industry that use these systems, the more that we have commonality of standards and experience, the better off we're going to be turning this issue of cybersecurity for small UAS in our nation, because, and Andrew touched this, that the whole of government cannot twitch the needle on small UAS market. It's so big, and so we've got to be very smart and joined up on our standards and our practices. So I think that's the answer to your question, Sean, is standards and practices.
I will piggyback on that, Sean, as well. I think Jason is spot on. I think one of the things that was really instrumental, especially in the development of Blue Uas 2.0, in the getting it, we did ANS, DIU, and Jason knows that we didn't want to work in a bubble. We didn't want to work in a vacuum. We didn't want to be the only ones trying to implement Blue Uas for the government as a whole. I think it was instrumental that the folks at DIU brought in other federal government players in the small UAS market to bring them in and got their input. Hey, this is the kind of UAS we need. This is what we need it for. This is what we're going to use it for. This is what we'd like to pay. This is the kind of standard that we have. So I believe as a whole, I believe that was instrumental to developing it. It's not working in a vacuum in a bubble where you're just using it. As far as standards within the government, again, it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge that we recognize. We know that's a hard thing to kind of tackle because we in the DoD use it for so many reasons. I think we've established some of the right procedures and policies, and there's an organization within the Department of Defense called the Joint Robotics Autonomous System Enterprise. It's called JRAIS. It's long, but I believe in their name it says a lot. And they're bringing all the smart folks in Department of Defense, bring them together, and to start trying to establish roadmaps, operability standards, policy, etc., within the federal or within the DoD that's going to help and establish those standards as a whole.
Thanks, Cash. As we know, prior standards have been established by the government, oftentimes in conjunction with commercial experts. Andrew, do you mind talking to how DIU may engage with commercial experts to help develop a future standard?
So in general, when DIU embarks on a project, we do that in partnership with a military partner organization. The preponderance of the work that we've done thus far has been with the Army. Cash already mentioned the JRAIS. We're involved with the JRAIS quite a bit. And we should see the whole of DoD pushing out an interoperability protocol in the near future for Blue Uas Hub. The balance that you have to try and strike there is not generating something that's calcifying or that bifurcates what we're doing with the vector that the commercial industry is going on. Because as we already mentioned, commercial industry is driving this a lot more than we are. It's a constant dance that we are continuing to struggle to get right. It's not something that we'll be able to publish and just walk away from, but we are working towards publishing standards, hopefully in the near future.
Awesome, thank you. And for Cash, I think you talked about the implementation guidance that came out last week. Can you shed a little bit more light on that? I know that that's something that isn't necessarily going to get out into the public eye, and I know you've had a bit of a public release on it, but is there any way that you can kind of help us understand that a bit more about how important that guidance is to a project like that?
Sean, thank you for that softball question for the audience. I personally wrote that, gave that to Sean and said, don't forget to ask me this question. Actually, we worked really hard on that. We were very fortunate that we went through the entire Department of Defense, all levels, all the services, all the way up to the Deputy Secretary of Defense and for implementation. We think it's extremely important overall. As I mentioned earlier, I kind of touched on it. It sets the procedures to procure and operate UASs, not only smalls, but group 1, 2, and 3. It sets those procedures as a government as a whole, or the DoD as a whole. And within those procedures, it allows you, it kind of regulates when a service member procures and operates safe, how to use it, when to use it, how to request exception of policy, how to request the use of airspace, et cetera, et cetera. So we think, but like I said, it's not released to everybody, so I'm not trying to say too much, but we think it's important for everyone in the Department of Defense to be able to use that technology. And not only that, it regulates, as I mentioned earlier, research and development. It regulates, service academies. It regulates what we can do in certain operational environments. There are 3 operational environments: controlled, uncontrolled, and benign. And then within these environments, what is your mission? So it brings it all the way down to the lowest level. And more importantly, I think with this policy, it pushes it down to the services and allows the services at their levels to set their own policies and to approve and review and approve exception of policy requests.
Thanks, Cash. For Andrew, so what do you see as the most challenging aspect of DIU's next steps in the Blue UAS space, particularly as we're looking to go from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 2? Where do you see the future roadmap being?
That's a pretty broad question. I could pick any one of those lines of effort and give you 10 challenges that we've got in the next month, let alone the next year. The biggest challenge is still pulling all the disparate stakeholders of government together. and doing it in a way that makes sense, and doing it in a way that makes the folks join the team because they want to join the team and not because they're being forced to join the team. In general, that's kind of the constant thread of problem solving inside of government is getting people on the same page. From a policy perspective, it's getting people to understand what the policy is and expediting the process by which people get to use UAS. One of our issues is that our demand signal is artificially suppressed because people don't know what they don't know at the moment.
Yes.
So we are not flying enough UAS nationally and federally. We know that UAS are increasingly strategically, tactically, operationally relevant. We're not getting after understanding what that really means enough yet because we've got our own legal and policy barriers in place. So for the next few years, the Blue Uas team is going to try very hard to either knock down or go around as many of the barriers, the perceived barriers as we can, with help from our friends at ANS, and get the federal demand signal up to where it should be.
Jason, you had mentioned both tactical versus non-tactical uses of drones, particularly the Corps' mission is somewhat different than a typical tactical use of a drone. And it's really important at DIU that we kind of balance, as we build out this ecosystem, where drones are used and for what purpose, because they vary in their capabilities and security and the necessity for security in different situations and environments. Can you talk to how the Corps uses drones and how that may be different?
Yeah, so first of all, we fly primarily in benign environments, but we do assessments based on the guidance that we have. And again, that goes back to having procedures that allow us to operate and use our discretion appropriately. And so primarily in benign environments, and primarily we do, again, scientific and engineering data collection, stuff that George Jetson wouldn't have dreamed of doing, that measuring the depth of water and mapping underwater with lasers, and it's science fiction stuff that apparently really exists, and I got people that do it with systems that we procure, and being able to get that highly accurate data is critically important. So it goes back to what Andrew said about the civil or the private sector driving the market. We're riding that wave of technology, and for a long time it was a Chinese technology wave, and there was a significant drop off when we lost their capability. And I've been kind of shocked at how fast we've been able to recover that, working with DIU and with ANS leadership, which it hasn't always been the case. I just, during this conversation, realized that I've forgotten to dread hearing from the Office of the Secretary of Defense over the last several months. So that's kind of a new experience for me. So good job, Cash. But yeah, the Corps does very detailed work, and we need that high quality data. And so we can't have that blanked out on behalf of security for a reconnaissance drone and not be able to use it, which is what we suffered from early on in this effort. And we've recovered nicely with Blue 2.0, and I hope to remain our team remains a part of this effort moving forward to ensure that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Cash, do you have any final words before we close out?
No, thank you again, Sean, for this. I just want to say that ANS, through the efforts and collaboration of everyone, DIU, the Army Corps of Engineers, we're very proud of the fact of the work that we've done, and we look forward to future collaboration in this effort and making it the best possible we can for the warfighter. So thank you for that, and I appreciate being a part of this.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Cash and Jason and Andrew for joining us today, and I'd really like to thank Capital Factory for putting this on. It was a pleasure being able to talk to everybody about the drone ecosystem and Blue UAS as a project at the Defense Innovation Unit. Thank you.